The new naps are here. The new naps are here. So that when Robbie, down the line to white, our own American mixed child who's due to rule over other nations, takes the podium and is at graduation, that he will look back and see his family, and that the buffaloes and the llamas are short and stocky. While naps produces flowers, we only deal with sawed-offs. And so when Robbie takes the podium down the line to white and has the new naps, what will happen when the new naps are with white? And when white gestures, who are these other people? Robbie will say, I'm short and stocky. And he will look at his family, those in the auditorium with a trench coat, who are both short and stocky buffalo and short and stocky llamas. And he will say, I'm glad that I have my family from America to support me when he graduates. Okay, into the next episode. A shout out to New Naps, to our new
on to the next episode.
Robbies
So
out
now
there.
we are at bird population, Daniel chapter 9, at neck crack without hand. That is to break someone's neck without hand. I think this is held down by several things and thus far in the parasitical world. And we're going to do an examination of trees and a cross-examination of the woodlands around us, the birds still, and claim that trees do move around. And one way of noticing that is going for number 1 and then watching trees kind of respond around you, and you'll see that they follow you. Birds, however, are going to be on a thievery note in the Bible. Daniel chapter 9, Matthew 13. The story of Joseph, which means bird, when he was first born in Laban, which means white, became skinny at that time frame, doing what we think is a replication of what the children of Israel would do in the future, showing a pretty interesting timeline exchange of how to thievery things from the past. And so if there's anyone close to that network, it's going to be the birds.
Don't forget to have your own memory, and that chi life growth comes up with heat, and then have intervisionary eat food, your own memory.
Today, we have a determining factor that there is in the book of Ezekiel an angel who from his loins downward and from his loins upward were like a fire all around there. And we're going to say in this area that we're going to be at pre-adolescent growth. And so what we're going to use is air memory before your adolescent actual buds. So you're going to be pre-adolescent. You're going to be before the teenage years, and you're still going to use air's memory. And what we were able to discover a while back was that when you were healing certain broken bones, that the surrounding area of the air itself was one which would counter-respond in a simple sense. And we want to go back to that idea and show where some of these ideas could be coming from. And they're coming out of the jungle. And they're coming out of odds and ends areas and are associated with one other vehicle by way of the birds. So at which point air was there is when we got into this next formula. And when we got into this next formula, we're going to go over this slowly, that the determining factor for some of these spiritually enhanced vehicles, which seem to be the other car related to birds, would be at an air ventricle, which air is relatable to its own sources in our mind, which seem to have a pivotal axis of 1 and 2 ratios, which means it can air as a memory circumnavigate, and the body will do the same thing with it. It has 2 different dispositions, air. And we want to keep that in mind. You also want to keep in mind the 1-cell and multi-cell growth stages.
7s rise up. Stay happy.
How we think we got out of the most latest attack. The most latest attack thus far is going to claim that anything you mention as you go up these stages, for instance, you start at where the angel was in the book of Ezekiel, and you go pre-adolescent to air, you are still able to climb up several
stairs
at pre-adolescent time frame. So at which point, when you used air and suspectfully the surrounding area of that which is growing and surrounded by air, you would therefore be able to intervisionary any ligament, including heart, which they've tried to attack, tooth, or anything, and air would be a part of the memory and growth system. But at a one cell and multi-cell, you're much more like that, which is, as a baby, one cell, which a one cell is stronger when you're dealing with God, than a multi-cell, which would seem to have more threads and fibers around a one cell, which would still be stronger when dealing with number one or God. But from a one cell to a multi-cell, anything in between a fulfillment of a multi-cell would look like, exhibit a half in between one cell and multi-cell, yet would still be able to sustain life. But the crystallite portions, that is, we want you here, they want me here, and your bone marrow will emit crystallites, would absorb any kind of fat. Any kind of fat is therefore registered at that time frame. And what we seem to be getting is a layer or a sheath that is underneath, or one layer greater in dimension, meaning the dimensions of a basic air memory, and this is to today's date, has not been discovered how to get out of this situation. So now we're trying to pinpoint new heart attacks based on this scenario of 1 and 2 occupying portions, which happen to be these days birds and one other vehicle, Daniel chapter 9.
Is that air related on the wing of an abomination?
That which is able to generate in growth itself was greater than what the spiritual world today has knowledge of accessing. Let's put up our projector screen for this next one. It is called the pre-designated area of travel for what's in jar. And for what's in jar is when somebody is injured. Therefore, the spiritual world, which is encased in that body has a host in there, which is very exciting for those people. And but they have a pre-designated area of what's travelable for what's in jar. And so the body or the spirit already knows what some of the safest places are. Well, just mentioning the word air, chemical, all these things, you would go into air, chemical, water, and acidics, thicker pulpy portions of the fruit. When you just mention those things, thus far in the spiritual world, whether it be from the Bible in the word ruka, which means spirit or wind, or be it some other form, their body has now gone over to the innate forms, in all innate forms in there. For instance, the spiritual world is so fast and so smart, they would go to a pre-designated area of travel for what's in jar, and they'll be in the safest crunkets that the spirit could quickly go into. Kind of like a crab into a shell. They just start feeling comfortable in their confining areas. They haven't been able to margarine in the spiritual form, I would suspect, anytime soon, any alternate road, any alternate routes. And so they were not able to find this next one, which is relatable to a crystallite cell, which would show a deeper layer of growth, a one cell to a multi-cell, which when pointing out any target would still be one layer underneath any growth of that target. It was able to defeat an air proximity, which put a realm to the air by way of the spiritual world, which means the spiritual world goes quickly into its occupiable scenarios and moves very quickly at knowing all of its routes and its realms. Well, lo and behold, you still can't touch two things. And so that very famous formula still worked all the way to the air capacity we're in which those two things starting off would be like new and old garments in the New Testament. And of course, good and evil. And of course, good and evil couldn't touch, as in one who was doing evil, one other person did a good deed while they were doing evil in their cells, and they simply could not grow doing the same thing. Okay. And so some of the former relations still exist. Well, being better than one who's traveling at that speed that the cars are traveling in their air capacity, they are simply using one out of, I'll say, 4 or more, because we have water, air, chemical, and acidics, if not more. And so they're not able to leave their air proximity of memory growth. As a matter of fact, when they put a little blip in you these days, they're saying that when you mention a single idea, it will go to that idea. But if we draw back towards our pre-adolescent soul who is growing and going into teenage and then adulthood, if you go before that as a child, you would still use air as memory and would not engage in any adult apparatus while growing. You would still engage as a child while growing and would still make it to several branches while growing, while just simply using air. Well, that's very good, except for the formula, if you were to look at it, didn't use the one cell to multi-cell, which was a different core group. Therefore, the people who were around us were actually frantic, and instead of us falling over, it was quite the opposite. And so what we realized was that some of the formulas that we had earlier were still plausible, even all the way over to the air memory worlds, which you have to calculate with a parasitical world and host agent world at a pre-designated cognitive level, which gets into its shell and knows almost every route. Going outside of that route using only memory, if you were to say outside of air memory, water memory, or chemical memory, or crystallite to fat absorption, they would not be able to readjust and would not be able to touch two things. These very microbial electrons are surrounded by acidics and fats. And yet, if they do not gather enough in their port, these guys are stunned and possibly knocked out, not on our side, the civilian side, but on their side, the parasitical side. So therefore, when using the stages of adolescent, pre-teenage, and then going into teenage and adult growth, you would say that by using air as a child from memory and then growing, you found several branches, yet from there you were able to find a one cell to multi-cell cognitive placement. You were able to therefore denote possibly a tooth, an organ, a heart, or a brain, and your memory would clot those areas and then still be able to regrow at a later date. The surrounding area is as if the surrounding area you don't want to overlap as a child while coming up would be the main reason why elder people were still growing in their old stages, yet their body wanted to be short. And the surrounding fat, like for instance, bone marrow, we want you here, they want me here, would absorb any kind of fat, and that kind of fat would go to where you were short at. However, they would be able to see tooth, heart, and different reactions and responses. We're going to go back to the idea in a minute. We're now going to go to the two cells next to each other. Before they do anything, they're able to register even before the air, before they even breathe each other. And at that point, when two cells were next to each other, they would know each other. And if one cell did one thing, the other cell would do the same thing. Therefore, skinnies, in a sense, would be able to be brought over in one of several different routes. However, most of our car features that we have around us are in a bizarre wind and have been completely awestruck at this point, seeing as how we're still here, because actually they're using things we have used before in the past, and we're wondering if they're not associated with the birds at this point, and how many people they've tried to chop down who don't know anything. You can't touch new and old garments. We're going to go back to this one. In a sense, we'll take happiness as a baby from the Bible and go to where the body isn't breathing. Put that happiness where the body isn't breathing. Don't overlap while you're growing, and then look for bone marrow. But if you were to do that and to go back into your old self as an older person, trying to go back into their old self or their natural self or their calm self or their relaxed stage, they wouldn't be able to touch new and old garments. This is known easily by parasites. This is not even a first-time understanding. This is known easily by parasitical bird agents and other vehicles, Daniel chapter 9. But you could stay happy, and that's one of the awesome things that we also learned during that time frame and while studying the Bible, is that you could stay happy and go to where you're not breathing and then look for bone marrow. These specks of bone marrow are electrons, and electrons is what's keeping that whole currency going at that point. Okay, so when we get back to the part where these guys are off track, they're now at hyperspeed, plus they're in their crab shell, pre-designated area of travel. What's in jar finds the safest places for their spirit.
yet there's definitely two vivid spirits in them. Well, they can't go over, and you can't get over the fact that the word digest, spirit, and wind are one in the Bible. Air, water, chemical, acidics are the four that we have here. And switching between any one of those would switch the breathing ports. Something that was added and studied a couple years back was that switching just the nasally portions as if one were going into a different alien world and could breathe applicable at some times, because you would go between different elements and switch what would be the interpretation of breathing. The interpretation of breathing at this point was pretty thick, in a sense it was a safe place at its very cognation. We'll go back to these points, as these all basically add up to the same predesignated area of travel for what's in jar. Well, they still weren't able to find the crystallite one cell to multi-cell, and I say crystallite because it absorbs every kind of fat, it seems. And if you wanted to denote, you were in a now different portio. You're in a different portio. You're almost like you're doing air memory at pre-NADS. But you were often happier by about 1 nanogram, plus you were more inward. And it was too hard for the people who were in that spiritual kind to actually grip. They couldn't figure out what was going on at that time frame. So that one cell, the multi-cell, was just a happier being. You were then able to denote where your memory and your growth should go. In a sense, the difference between a baby growth and adult growth is almost chemical to smell, add plus less plus scent, adolescent, in which dogs with a long snout, if they were to use an attack, would be using, we think, a growth, spirit, plus scented odor to get in there. And to denote all those things were still blocked away by fatted growth. So fat growth took away scented growth. But this new one was air. And so we're suspecting that the crystallite one cell to multi-cell, that is one cell to multi-cell as a growth, would be able to sustain life anywhere between one cell and multi-cell, was still happier as a more deeper growth compound, and was not able to be discovered yet on a level which almost looks bizarre. Once you realize that air is that intelligent, some people get lost. They get stuck in a daze. Some people never leave. It's also considered for their world and their realm, the spiritual world, to be air, the same word as spirit in the Bible. Therefore latches on and locks in, and then starts to know every safe route in their realm. They weren't able to switch over from that realm and almost lost control at the speeds that they were going. Still trying to produce death, however. Would not have affected me at all if they had crashed their car. Okay, so I think that's going to discover that. We want to do one for the breaking of the neck, for the future things to look out for on our map. We have the Big Bambi, just going over the Bering Strait. Or look for Hawaii, and look for a frown in Hawaii towards a mask, which is going to be a deer mask, on top of his head, which is America coming in from the west. Well, anyway, going back to his neck around the Bering Strait, we're going to see that his neck is snapped. We're going to go ahead and put a tag and a label for neck snapping without hand, by the way, breaking one's neck for futuristic ramifications. You heard it here first. Free Willy SeaWorld. We've been on this thing since the beginning. And so how we were able to get out of that, and I think we're almost done with our entire survey. We're actually way past on even. We're on even plus 1 bar past where they're at. But we're definitely at even on this one. But let's go to the next snapping. So as the body is not touching new and old garments, or as you see these little insects come out of their shell, you realize that your body is able to refracture and refractor itself, which means if you're disposing of old and you have new garments coming in, you're actually doing sheaths like little crystallites, and your body's now rejuvenating and getting rid of old material faster. So somewhere in there is where we think they are doing their first acupuncture to get in there to the snapping of the neck. We feel that as you're almost like that and you shift your body and you're almost like that, that your organs that are coming out are going to be surrounded by fats. and that those organs and fat are very quick. In a sense, if the elder people are still growing, and if they overlap, where they're still growing at would overlap and give them a heart attack and they'd eventually die, that their body feels to be short. Well, as their body feels to be short, one of those fats that we are getting from crystallite spores who absorb every kind of fat is that those kind of fats are good for one who's trying to be short and immediately encompass and start growing with the new shell. These new shells will prevent any potential within the market, and things to look out for are people's neck snapping without hand, and that's by their surrounding parasitical elements who have been nothing but practicing and studying the entire time on how to produce death. We actually don't know who these people are, and if they're related to Egypt, which they most likely are, because of the oldness in this kind of idea of Miriam's, also the fact that they feel that they need to be something in life, most likely will never stop until they are smacked hard. That is one who has sense smacked into them. Before that they were senseless, but now after they're smacked hard, they now start to have sense. To me, it seems they will not stop until this time frame, but I still can't tell exactly who everybody is. And so there's a lot of adjustments to that kind of idea, but this we know thus far is that they are a paranoid people who have not gone far with us. And what they found in us, I don't know what they found, but they haven't gotten anywhere with us. As a matter of fact, they actually only made me smarter to every single thing that they were doing. They have, whoever they are with these birds, stolen most of our stuff, being from over there. But I'm going to suspect this is who it is, who is driving by at warp speed, even though you don't know it. And I'm going to suspect the Arab non-African, and would make it to a deep-seated African village, just because the idea is that we know what the other people will know, yet the other people don't exist, because they've never existed. But they're the only ones who exist. And so in order to make other people exist, they may have to try and make them exist. And it could be the same way for birds. Okay, so I think that's almost going to wrap us up. And thus far, you want to see some people who are shocked. They still can't touch two things. And this new air velocity actually made it to the same basic inscriptions of not touching two things. And so we've been very impressed, and we feel just fine. And the residue of what they did was like a fat which was absorbed by a chrysolite at the time frame between a 1 and a 2. And then a multi-cell growth. So when the multi-cell growth still has a crystallite absorption of fat capability. Alrighty, well, you guys still stay safe, and remember the parasitical world has that much knowledge, which are birds and people around you. And remember to steal everything. What to look out for in the future. Till next time, over and out.